Hello, my name is Kira Chambers, and today I'm going to present to you my oral history project on the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War occurred from the years of 1954 through 1975. It began because of a conflict involving the northern and southern sides of Vietnam. The United States took part in this war by aiding the southern side of Vietnam in their quest to stop the spread of communism. The northern side of Vietnam, also called the Viet Cong, wanted to unite Vietnam under a single communist government, modeled after those of China and the Soviet Union. The southern side of Vietnam did not favor communism, as did the United States. The United States did not want communism to spread to their area, so they helped the southern side throughout the war. In order to develop a strong army for the United States, many soldiers were drafted through the Selective Service system. My grandfather, Preston Chambers, was drafted into the war through the Selective Service system. Preston lived in Philadelphia and was drafted into the war at the age of 25 in 1968. He fought in Vietnam and left after 2 years of service. He, along with the other soldiers, fought in order to preserve the safety of the United States. I had the opportunity to interview Preston Chambers to determine his role in the Vietnam War. The Selective Service system was abolished in 1973. However, men between the ages of 18 through 25 were required to register to ensure that citizens will fight for the United States when needed. The system was used during the Vietnam War to acquire great numbers of soldiers. Preston was asked how he felt about the Selective Service system and how being drafted affected his experience in the war. He responded that he was against it completely, since he did not want to be in a war that he did not have a passion for. He had to leave his girlfriend and his passion for basketball. Preston was very against war from the beginning, and the fact that he was being forced into it made his experience even worse. His friends and he were very against the war and did not have a passion for it. As soon as Preston was drafted, he went through 8 weeks of intense physical and mental training for the war. The soldiers had to learn and understand the practices of infantry, engineering, and other useful skills through challenging courses. The soldiers did not suffer in the war because of lacking preparation, but because of the environment in Vietnam. Their training was extensive, but it did not cover the new setting of Vietnam. Preston was asked about how his training had affected him in the war. He responded that he trained at Fort Polk, Louisiana. This training had occurred for 4 months prior to the war. It was called Advanced Infantry Training. Preston said that this training was very helpful and had prepared him for the war. Preston was asked about how he felt entering the war. He responded that he was very nervous, as were many other soldiers. They were not only nervous because they were entering a new place, but also because many felt as though they did not understand their reason for fighting the war. This made it very difficult to feel confident upon entry to the war. Even though Preston did not like the idea of war, his parents deemed it was the right thing to do. Some parents, including Preston's, had fought in World War I, which was a war that was later perceived as patriotic and meaningful. This made many parents believe that the Vietnam War would be of the same nature. Preston had his own life at home before the war, and he knew his life was about to change forever. Preston was asked about his life during the war. There were many differences from his life before and after the war. Preston was asked about the style of fighting used by the northern side of Vietnam. He was asked if his participation in the war had affected him and the other soldiers. He responded that the jungles of Vietnam made it very difficult to see the enemy while in battle. This made the Vietnam War very different from most wars. The northern side of Vietnam had learned many military techniques and lessons from their 8-year-long war with France, which gave them an advantage. Although they were ill-equipped, their strengths were mostly based on their knowledge of the area, customs, and language. Preston had never been in a war before, and the fact that this war involved a whole new area made it extremely difficult to fight in. Preston had never seen the enemy shoot at him, and he never knew who he was shooting at. Because of this, many soldiers died unexpectedly. 58,000 American people were killed in this war. Preston was asked if he was ever upset by seeing so many of his fellow soldiers being killed. He responded that he was saddened, but none of his close friends had died, but some were shot. While in battle, one of his friends was walking next to him and was shot unexpectedly. Preston was right next to his friend, which made the action very unsettling. Many soldiers were wounded while fighting, not only because it was difficult to see the enemy, but also because Vietnam was an unfamiliar place to them. Preston was then asked how he felt fighting in such an unfamiliar place. The northern side of Vietnam had a knowledge of the environment in Vietnam, which gave them a great advantage. The northern side came into the Vietnam War with the exact confidence that the Americans lacked. Preston told me that fighting in the war was extremely scary and strange. He said, Seeing the jungle was like nothing I had ever seen, and fighting the war was like nothing I had ever done. This shows how much the environment of Vietnam affected the soldier. Preston was asked about his life after the war. Many soldiers have said to have been affected by the Vietnam War in numerous ways. Soldiers have had mental diseases or physical effects after this war. Preston was asked if the Vietnam War had affected him in the same way. He responded that the stress and time spent in battle contributed to the Parkinson's disease and prostate cancer he has today. He said that his participation in the Army caused this. Although his service in the Army affected him in many ways, he was able to return home from Vietnam after 2 years of service. He had a double hernia and needed an operation. Many soldiers had returned home for similar reasons. The country did not welcome these soldiers back. Because of the controversy created by the Vietnam War, soldiers were treated with unkindness and unfairness. Citizens still did not support the soldiers fighting in the war. They believed that it was unnecessary for the U.S. to get involved in the first place, and it was not needed for troops to go to Vietnam. Preston was asked if he had received any backlash from the citizens of the U.S. who disagreed with the war, and if he was surprised by their reactions. Some citizens blamed the events that occurred in Vietnam on the soldiers. Citizens treated them with distrust as they protested against them. Society had no interest in hearing about the experiences had by the soldiers in the war. Many citizens felt uncomfortable and subsequently performed cruel acts towards the soldiers. Preston said that no one had been cruel to him because of his role as a soldier. He did not personally experience this negativity, but he had heard about other soldiers experiencing the cruelty. Most of his close friends and family were proud of him since he was safe and at home. Preston was asked if he had trouble adjusting back to life in the United States after the war. He was asked if he felt out of place coming back to the U.S. Preston responded that the United States was not any different than it was before the war. Soldiers had said that society had ignored them after the war. However, he responded that he had not experienced this. Preston said that nothing had changed since he was in the war. This made it very easy for him to adjust back to his life in the United States. Finally, Preston was asked if he had experienced any long-term effects that changed his life after the war. He was asked if the war had changed him as a person. He replied that he had gone through no significant changes. He just realized that he disliked the war going into it. He said it was just as bad, if not worse, than he thought. He was very grateful to come home to a place where he was familiar. He was very excited to have his first child when he arrived home. This child was Chris Chambers, who is my father. Preston experienced many different events throughout the Vietnam War, and his life changed drastically because of it. This is important because the soldiers' participation in the Vietnam War changed the United States in many ways. It is important to understand soldiers' role in the war so we as citizens can further educate those using first account witnesses' depictions of the war. We as citizens are called to educate those about the history of our country, and by using people's experiences, we can decide how the event made a difference in our history.